Allende's own position as a first cousin once removed of elected Chilean socialist president Salvador Allende adds an additional layer of passion and fascination to this beautiful novel. So we know about the story a little bit. So here we have a little blurb about the Treva family. There are 4 generations, and we know that we are talking about 7 decades, right? And we also are looking at how 2 protagonists tell the story from their own perspectives. That's Esteban and Alba. So during these 7 decades, we see the different characters that are going to be telling us their own story. And we'll see, how the South American family is composed in the sense that we can see from the great-grandparents to the present, the 20th century. So one thing that is important to remember here is that one thing that Isabel Allende wants to point out is that we should reflect on the political, economic, and social turmoil within the 20th century Chile. She talks about the tyranny of the landholding elite, the rising resentment of the dispossessed peasants, the growth of labor unions, and the conservative reaction against them, the instability of the mining industry, the loss of national autonomy to foreign businesses, interest, the increasing socialist electoral success, culminating in the presidency of Salvador Allende, and finally the military coup in 1973, which led to the brutal regime of Augusto Pinochet. So let's talk about Clara and Esteban Treva. And here we can start our discussion, and I want to know if you have any comments or questions at this point, or anything that you would like to share with us. Because Clara is a very important character, right? She's very strong, and she's very different because she has special ways of looking at life, and also she is able to do some esoteric things, and so she holds the house in a very different way. She is like the opposite of her husband, Esteban Treva, who is a more radical, traditional person. So I think, you can see the contrast between what the patriarchal power structure prevalent in Latin America is somehow portrayed through this character of Esteban, and Clara being a more of a free soul as a mother, as a social being, and the situations that she has to deal with. So I don't know if you recall here, at the novel, there are so many names and characters, right? So who are these families? I just want to show you these so that you can see the family tree. So we have first the Del Valle family, which are Severo del Valle, Nivia del Valle. And I want you to pay attention to the name Nivia, because we will see also how the names of the main women characters, female characters, they have a symbolism, correct? So Severo and Nivia have many children, but we're going to concentrate on 2 of them, who are Clara, So Clara is also a name that has a relationship with the name of Nivea. And then the sister, Rosa del Valle, the green-haired woman who dies early. And then later on, Clara, the little sister, is going to marry Esteban, who was going to marry Rosa, right? But she dies, so he comes back after 20 years when Clara is a grown-up, a young woman, and marries her. So now we have the Treva family, and Esteban Treva and Clara, if you remember, had 3 children, Blanca, and now see the names of the 3 characters so far, Nivea, Clara, and Blanca. And then also Jaime and Nicolas are part of the family. But in that space, when we go to the countryside, to the hacienda, the Tres Marias hacienda, there is also the other family who are the Garcias. And the Garcias are Pedro Garcia. Then Pedro Garcia has 2 children, Pedro Segundo Garcia and Pancha Garcia. And then Pedro Segundo Garcia has a son, Pedro Tercero Garcia. There is a son in between the 2 families, who is Esteban Garcia. And then Pedro Tercera Garcia and Blanca Treva are going to have a daughter, Alba, who is the writer of the novel, right? So now we have all these 4 female names. I don't know if you know the meaning of Nivea, Clara, Blanca, and Alba. What does that mean, or does it tell you something? Anything that you want to comment here about those names?
Well, they'll have to do with like clarity or light.
Exactly. Exactly, because Nivea is very white, no, Clara, clear, Blanca, white, Alba, dawn, but it all has to do with that, with purity too. And also, I think that Isabel Allende perhaps is telling us to see about how innocence is violently broken in these 4 women for different reasons. Yeah, so then we have the other characters that are also important. Of course, we have the Nana, we have Tránsito Soto, Miguel, Ana Diaz, the poet, and so forth. Ferula, Esteban's sister, and other ones. So here we can see, a little bit of the whole family, these 4 generations during 7 decades, from the 20s to the 70s, that Isabel Allende explores in her book and tells us about their lives. So what kind of questions raises, the family, and what were you able to see, or how you feel about the different families here? What did we learn or call your attention?
Dr. Ferreira, I know that this is a good question, but can we circle back to the names that we mentioned earlier about clarity and dawn? And would you say that the author, and maybe you're going to get to this later, but one thought that I had, was the author influenced by principles of perhaps Christianity or Catholicism, in which women are often thought of as pure and chaste? And do you want to speak later on that, or it's just a thought that crossed my mind?
No, that's really a great point, Jessica. You can continue with your thought. I think it's wonderful.
So I think in ways that the author shows us these characters as strong-willed, or perhaps not necessarily a stereotypical way that we might consider women. But at the same time, with their names, it does, in my opinion, point toward what our views are in the religious sense of women, as, and just again by their names of what we should consider them to be, in their gender.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, she's definitely playing with that idea of women's purity, in the sense that patriarchal society had the right to have relationships, while the women were to be always pure or virgins, and that way arrive to their wedding, right? So
Right.
I think like the first couple, Nivea and Severo, which are like the first generation that we see in the novel, how many children did they have? Do you remember? Or they had many children, right? Like 16.
I do not recall. I want to call on my colleague. Ileana, do you recall how many children?
I do not. I recall that it was a lot, and I don't think that all of them lived. Like, I think some of them passed away when they were younger and that kind of thing as the story was going on. And then it became more focused on Clara and Rosa, because they were going to become integral to the story.
Yeah, correct. They have like 16 children, something like that. But, I mean, also, they were not the common neighbors, right? In the society, in the small town that they lived. The church did not see them as conservative or proper. And so Nivea was always worried the way their children behave, because they have like, Clara had special traits, and Rosa, she had green hair, and they were very much of free spirits. And then Clara, naturally, again, the name to be, it could be Clara, clear, also light and all that. And she's completely different from the rest of her siblings and children in general. She has like all these different ways of doing things, correct? And then I think, when you were mentioning that, about the Catholic Church, you can see a character that is probably opposed or juxtaposes with her. It would be Stefan's sister, Ferula, that she has to stay taking care of her mother. And she's very religious, and she has this way of living that is completely different with the way Clara acts, as a free spirit and full of love and sensualism and all this. And then, of course, they have their daughter Blanca also, which has a big will. And she's madly in love with a man that she's not supposed to be living, because of hierarchical the structure. He doesn't belong to her class, so it's not accepted by her father, especially. But then they have this very beautiful love affair, and from that love comes Alba, and Alba is also a very strong woman that is gonna get into politics and be out fighting for the rights of people, right? And of course, they do not match the idea of the times of conservative society in the ways that women have to behave. So what do we do with those characters? How do we read them? How much do we like them? What do you think about that? Did you have a special character of the ones that we have named, or other one?
all of the characters, the female characters were strong in their own way. But as I was reading it, I almost felt like they were martyrs because all of the women suffered some kind of tragedy, some kind of brutality, harsh circumstances, whereas the men, well, I guess Esteban, he he led his life so merrily, and I said this earlier, but he kind of he epitomizes the idea of entitlement with his class and being a man.
Yeah, definitely. You see, it's interesting because we can see clearly how the patriarchal society was at the time and how he was very strong, but also, he will be doing things outside his family, right? We see how he has different relationships. We have this other character, Tránsito Soto, or Pancha Garcia, who is raped by this man. And then out of that rape comes Esteban Garcia, who will play a difficult role when it comes to the story of Alba, and when we arrive to the 70s and the political repression that took place in Chile during the coup d'etat, right? Any other characters, Jessica? Yes.
Yes, I was thinking more about the description of each character, and in a way, there's really not one. Well, I was raised very Catholic, growing up, and very traditional. So I feel like I represent a bit of each character, because now as I am in my adult years, I feel like sometimes I am a rebel or sometimes I am outspoken, even though in my grandparents and sometimes in my own parents' home, it's still very patriarchal. So in ways I could really relate to the different characters, but not just one. There's bits and pieces of me in which the story unfolds that I could identify with.
Oh yeah, definitely. Each one has a different trait, and I think that what is portrayed in the novel, it's contemporary because as a society we still live within a patriarchal structure, maybe less repressive, but the ideas are there embedded in all of our acts. And but then we have to constantly be questioning why this is like this. And then, like you said, we become rebels because we see that certain things are not right or shouldn't be this way. And questioning, we learn how to respond to a lot of different violence that take place to women in their daily lives. So yeah. Any other
I would
thoughts?
completely
No, go
agree.
ahead, Jessica.
No, I would just say I would completely agree with that. And we all have different seasons as well in our lives. And so perhaps each of us could identify with those different seasons that we go through. It doesn't necessarily encompass who we are as a whole, but it's a part of our story or our history as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Any other thoughts? Anyone else that wants to talk about how you will relate to a character as the ones that we have described so far?
It was very interesting, Blanca and Pedro's love story. I think that really was a very good example of the struggle between the classes. And it was quite interesting. Then you look at Jaime and Nicolas, and I feel like neither one of them, they were both in love with Amanda, and neither one of them I don't really think that class came into it when they were considering a relationship with Amanda or marrying her. It was the idea for Jaime to be married at all rather than a class thing. But I do see that it was such a struggle for Blanca and Pedro. So it was interesting to see that class struggle.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because also, there is a double standard. You're bringing that right here to the table. When it's a male, what is expected from him is totally different that what is expected from a daughter, from a woman. Male can do other things out of wedlock, right? And that's why he can be with Amanda and not necessarily wanting to get married or not, while Blanca is just a no, 100%, because Pedro does not belong to her class and she's the daughter. So she can't. She doesn't have the right to choose what is best for her. There's the patriarchy, the father who has to decide who you get married to, right? And she is married to a loser. So yeah, it's very different because the same thing happens with Esteban and Pancha. And then I think that there is the confrontation with Clara and Esteban when they found out about Blanca. Remember that? That because they find out that Blanca is having a relationship with Pedro, then the father goes to get her and marries her to this person who is just seeking a fortune, correct? A count, supposedly a French count. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Rather than marry Blanca to the father of her child and see her happy, Esteban would rather marry her to a French count who she didn't know and ends up being miserable with.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know if you have any other comments, any of you here. We have here some quotes for you to think about what they mean. So I don't know if any of you would like to read the first quote.
Sure, I'll read it. She was considered timid and morose. Only in the country, her skin tanned by the sun and her belly full of ripe fruit, running through the fields with Pedro Tercero, was she smiling and happy. Her mother said that was the real Blanca, and that the other one, the one back in the city, was a Blanca in hibernation.
Thank you. So what is this quote trying to tell us? How do we interpret this quote just as a quote in itself?
I'm going to try and respond without coughing because I've been coughing the whole time. Sorry.
All right.
So it's basically recognizing that Blanca is her true self when she is in Tres Marias with Pedro Tercero, and when she's away from him and away from Tres Marias, she's still present, but she's not fully alive. So it's kind of like a bear maybe going into hibernation, or kind of what happens from fall to spring, where plants start to go dormant and then they come back in the spring and they're in full bloom in the spring. So that's kind of how I interpret this quote in reference to Blanca.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, because she is separated from her lover, from her love, and she's sent to the city, right, as a punishment. So I think here, this is from Clara's notebook diary, and Clara understood properly. She had a different point of view from that one from her husband Esteban, correct? So she can see how happy, how well her daughter is when she comes, and then she feels the sadness when she was sent to the city to hibernate, not to see her love anymore, right? And that's the difference between Clara and Esteban, that Clara was very much down to earth, didn't see that difference in social classes. She didn't care for that. Let's look at the other quote. Anybody wants to read it? It's a short one.
Sure, I can read it. I've always been very proud, and because of my pride, I've suffered more than most.
Who do you think that quote comes from? Anybody? Any guesses?
Can I guess it was a male character?
Yes, that's very good. That's the patriarchal system tells us that the father, Esteban, is the one who's going to say that, because at the end, he really starts changing his mind when he sees what Blanca and Alba have to go through, correct? So he realizes that he didn't act the best way possible. And if we go to the other quote, anybody can read it?
I'll read it again. She was one of those people who was born for the greatness of a single love, for exaggerated hateness, for apocalyptic vengeance, and for the most sublime forms of heroism. But she was unable to shape her fate to the dimensions of her amorous vocation.
Okay, so any guesses are we talking about in this quote? Which character?
I'm not sure. Is that Blanca?
I think so, yeah. She's talking about Blanca again, right? Or Clara? I think it's Clara. She was one of those people who was born for the greatest of a single love. And I think that Clara never left Esteban because of her love, right? For exaggerated hatred, for apocalyptic vengeance, and for the most sublime forms of heroism. But she was unable to shape her fate to the dimensions of her amorous vocation. She dies young and leaves all these presence in Esteban's life. And the next one, I think that's interesting to understand also the other component. This is to assuage our conscience, darling, but it doesn't help the poor. They don't need charity, they need justice. So who's talking here?
That was Clara with talking to Esteban.
And what is she referring to, if you remember or if you can guess?
Was that when they were and it's working through building Tres Marias, and kind of they kind of had a difference of opinion, I think, with how he wanted to run it and the vision that she had for it. And I think this particularly was around like when he was having them pay for things with pink slips or something like that, and she was trying to kind of make him see it differently.
Yeah. And I think this is very important because Isabel Allende walks us through the different centuries, and she make us look also the history of exploitation of human beings and how it ends in this big war between the two different social classes, right? Because during the 20s, 30s, 40s, when there was the landowners and the workers were almost enslaved to work for the patron without any rights, without a good pay or anything. So, we see this system here early and we see what is going to develop because people isn't happy with this system. And then April, I think this is your quote, so you might want to read it. April, you there?
Oh, but we will see each other again. Life is long and full of unexpected turns. Trencito Soto.
Do you remember who was Tránsito and why this quote was chosen, or what does it says to you?
I love this quote. It was almost like poetic justice, because she's a prostitute and she's talking with Esteban, and she asked for 50 pesos, and he's like, "Yeah, okay, I'll give you these pesos." He's very kind of condescending, not believing that she could make something of herself. And then all these years later, he comes to her and is actually asking for her help to find Alba. So it was, I really love that quote because she was determined and to live a better life, to make something of herself, to get her own money, and she did it.
Yeah, absolutely. She was a woman empowered and she had many social ties. So she's able to help him save his granddaughter, right? That all the big men will not help him at all. So yeah. And then the last quote, I don't know if you want to read it, Jessica.
Yes. Well, before I read it, I just want to make a comment about that quote.
Sure.
I learned probably later in life that, and this quote makes me think of this, it's best not to burn your bridges. So whether or not someone had wronged you or you see yourself above someone else, you just never know how things might turn out, and they might be able to support you, or you might land up working together. That's what this quote made me think about.
Yeah, no, that's a very good way of looking at that, because like the quote says, we'll see each other again.
It's just a small world.
It is.
Okay, so the last quote, those who have always won will continue to win. And something that comes to mind when I read that quote is the rich get richer. Or in other words, those in power somehow continue to gain more power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other comments for that last quote?
It was interesting because I feel like Esteban, he grew more confident after Clara told him that, but it was kind of sad for, all the others who were hoping for change, this radical change, and then this change that did happen didn't last too long. So it was kind of a bittersweet quote.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because he learns the hard way, right? I mean, he has to suffer what her daughter and her granddaughter have to go through, and he realizes the truth of the patriarchal society and of power, no? So, okay, so I see at the chat that Carol says that small wins are still considered wins. I look at it as a hope. Okay, that's another way of looking at that. Um, that's true when it's a little win for someone that doesn't win all the time. But when Clara says who always won in this context, it's referring to the upper class, right? So yeah, it's like, they fight so much for their rights, but they cannot win, especially when, remember, Pedro is organizing all the workers at the hacienda. It's such a difficult moment for him. So yeah. Okay, what other comments do we have about this family or the topics that the novel raises?
Being conscious of time, there's one pressing question I do have for you. I'm not sure. I know that the book is based on historical events, but I'm really clueless. Who was the poet? What what historical figure was the poet based on?
The poet is Pablo Neruda, who is a Chilean poet of that time. Especially during the 70s, he also was killed because he was a socialist. He was poisoned, so that we learned many years after that took place. But he is considered like the Chilean poet, a very important poet. He wrote many poetry books, from his early poems that are very romantic, like 20 canciones de amor y una canción desesperada, 20 poemas de amor y una canción desesperada, like 20 poems of love and a desperate song. But then he also wrote a poem that writes the whole history of Latin America from the moment of the arrival of the Spanish to indigenous land, which is called General Son or Canto General, which is a saga that tells all the different moments of difficult encounters between the working class or indigenous people with other forces that extract or take their belongings. Or we're talking about also nature and natural resources like gold, silver, and then later also he talks about, for example, um, the bananeras, when we are talking about agriculture at a later moment in history. So the Canto General also, it's a very important book in Latin America, and he has at that point very much socialist thoughts during Pinochet's um, dictatorship. So he was poisoned and killed. Um, so that's the poet that she refers to. I mean, she doesn't say it. Also, she doesn't. We're talking about all these because we know, but in the novel, Chile is never mentioned, right? There is not a country. There is not that any of this is mentioned um, in a direct way. We know that she is talking about her country. This book was published in 1982, right? So she's left Chile in 1975. She had to exile in Venezuela because of her family. You know, she is Isabel Allende, niece of Salvador Allende, and she writes this book right then when just, it's not even 10 years after the coup. And there was a lot of repression in Chile. The dictatorship was very harsh, and a lot of people were disappeared. The official number is 30,000 that were tortured and disappeared, killed during the dictatorship. But the dictatorship lasts a long time. So yeah, we know that. And then, Isabel Allende, after Venezuela, she came to live to the United States, and then she published a lot of other books. But this book, it was really like an eye opener in a way of what took place in Chile from the point of view of a family, right? Because we see it through what happens to this family, Del Valle, Treva family, and how the families, because also the Garcia family, no, the Pedro II Garcia, how they have to endure also these very disruptive moments in Chilean history, right? So yeah.
Thank you for satisfying my curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you so much for the presentation. I don't know if anyone else had any other questions. Dr. Ferreira, I know that you had mentioned the film series that you were working on. Did you want to share that with, or tell a little bit about that? And I will also include that with the post-event survey, some information on that.
Oh, sure. Thank you for reminding me, April. Yeah, we are working on different events commemorating or thinking and reflecting about what it means 20 years after 9/11, right? So we did have a panel last week, and then our next event is a film series in which we're going to be showing 3 different films. And I want to invite you because the first one is a documentary that touches on a lot of different 911s around the world, and also how 911 was received in different countries and what was taking place in those countries. And one of those, it's about Chile, the coup d'etat of September 11, 1973, among the 11 short stories that are by 11 different directors. So it's a very good one if you want to be there. It's going to be at 6 on Thursday, the 30th, next Thursday, at, if you remember, SAC 154, if you are in the area, because, since we're going to be showing the film, we could not do a virtual one. So if you are in the area, come and just go there. Then the second one, it's a great film. It's called Manchuka. Has any of you seen that film? It's a Chilean film, which is really good. It's about two young adolescents that go to school, and one is a Mapuche indigenous boy, and another one is a very European elitist boy, and they befriend each other. But then, among that friendship, you can see what's taking place in Chile at the same time that Alba is telling her story. So I think it's great also, if you want to see it and be there at the Q&A, because it has a lot of points that you'll make a connection with this novel for sure. And the last one, it's thriller film that talks about what happened on 911 here in the United States, and it's Zero Dark 30, which is a lot of feature film. I don't know if some of you have seen it or not, but also all the films are going to be presented and discussed by different faculty members who specializes in those areas. So you're welcome to come. You can bring friends, family. It's open. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. And we hope to see you at our next Latinx Alumni Chapter event. And have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
April, were you going to do the raffle?
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me, Ileana. So one of our winners is actually one of our committee members. So Carol, you are the winner of a book, and the other individual is not here. So they will need to check our Facebook page to find out who the other additional winner is. But thank you, everybody, and that's it. Have a good night.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Have a good night.